previous slave communities were being very prosperous. You know why? Because they could work, right? They were not afraid to work, not in any way, shape, or form. And so just in general, they were outworking their white counterparts of the time. Going back to our example here, it could have, as long as, and there was like the first black bank, right? For blacks only, and they were beginning in the very beginning post slavery, becoming very economically wealthy. There was a lot of very wealthy previous slaves in that time period, and they banked, and they had a Black Wall Street was created, right, for
Really?
black businesses. Oh yeah, there was this whole economic thing right up to the Jim Crow time frame. The previous slave communities were being very prosperous. You know why? Because they could work, right? They were not afraid to work, not in any way, shape, or form. And so just in general, they were outworking their white counterparts of the time. Because the white counterparts of the time owned them, right? They weren't the workers, and so they were getting outworked. And then there was all sorts of processes in place that broke that up, type of thing. The bank ended up having some board of directors that stole the money, that were white, by the way, because you couldn't get.
Why did the black bank hire a white board of directors or elect a white board of directors?
Had to, because you couldn't get a charter.
I don't
still
know
needed a charter.
any of that.
Right. Yeah. So still needed a charter, and they end up getting embezzled like 3 times, by the way. And so like there's this interesting history, right? Because we talked about like the known history and what's taught and what's widely shared and what's not widely shared. The information that's there in the internets, available to be researched, because people had contributed to the knowledge of mankind. But if you don't even know to prompt a search to look for the first black bank, like, you wouldn't have conceptually even understood that was even a possibility. And that's the struggle with a lot of the things, you know what I mean? And I don't know, I think it's very interesting. And I think our overall economic situations, right, we have some cross agendas with some very large organizations. And it's going to make things so. Let me give you another example. Right here, here's me talking about economics. So, not too long ago, 2019 till about now, some of the biggest hedge funds like BlackRock and Vanguard were buying single-family unit homes.
Yeah,
by the masses, millions of them across the United States. They bought them on a balloon interest. So they pay 1% interest now. 5 years later, it go to 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever, right? But they could always refinance back to 1%. No big deal. Interest rates now are 6 to 7%, 8% in some cases. So they can't refinance back down to 1%. So when these things start hitting the market again, they're going to have to let them go, because they're not going to pay the 5% on the 1% home that they were hoping to all buy up so that they can just rent them. And now people just rent family homes instead of renting just apartments, which was the previous game. And so there's going to be a market bust coming up in this year and early next year of all these homes will be flooding the market, because all these big people, all these big hedge funds are going to start letting go of these assets.
Interesting.
Yep.
This is an example. I imagine the Chinese housing market, the Chinese bubble, when that dam finally breaks, I imagine that's going to be much more devastating. Like on a scale that the world has never seen before. Do you know what's going on in China, housing market wise?
Oh yeah. They created all these ghost towns, ghost cities.
So a big reason why they've been doing that, I'm not going to pretend to understand all of it, but China was facing a housing shortage in the early 90s. Part of the
Mm,
reason was because the rules that the Chinese Communist Party had imposed were so restrictive that it, right, just like we talked about earlier, communal living, it sort of disincentivizes buildings. It
mhm,
disincentivizes the creation of anything. By shifting to allow people to invest their money into the housing market as part of like a 401k setup.
mhm, mhm,
Like instead of putting your money into the stock market, you put your money into building the house that your family is going to live in 10, 15 years down the line. Okay, let's incentivize people to do that so that we'll build more houses and we'll, cap it at like a 20% upfront cost that the builders can request. So, right, that's the down
mhm,
payment that people are used to making. So people would borrow to put that down payment down.
mhm,
Okay, well, the bank will let you do that because you've got this whole new system set up to help us build houses, and we've aligned our
mhm,
monetary policy. The builders started getting a little greedy. They're like, hey, we're going to need like 80%. Well, the banks are still willing to loan it. So, yeah, cool. So, this exploded the Chinese housing industry. And if you've watched any videos on the quality of things that are built by the Chinese
mhm,
engineers, they're not great.
mhm,
Like the dams that they're building in these countries for the Belt and Road Initiative, for the One Belt One Road Initiative, are
mhm,
cracking, non-functional. Like the houses, the apartment, the cities that they've been building are awful. But you build people these homes, and everybody, and we're talking billions, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people
mhm,
are now very over leveraged on homes that sometimes don't get finished. And when they do get finished, are not great quality.
mhm,
And and they are allowing outside investment as well, right? So BlackRock owns quite a bit of quite a bit
mhm,
of assets, several assets. What's the best way to frame that? They are tied into the Chinese market in a way that is going to be very difficult for them to get out of
mhm, mhm.
without absolutely taking a bath on.
Right.
And so when you finally get people defaulting on their loans because, like, let's say they're not able to work for whatever reason, like maybe they've been locked in their homes, or they've been not allowed to go outside because COVID, for
Yeah.
instance. Like the Chinese Communist Party is going to have to continue to devalue their currency just to keep up.
Mhm,
Like, and on top of that, their demographics are so poor. Like, they are not going to be able to have enough kids to overcome the incredible burden of all of the elderly people that made it through Mao's revolution and that are aging past the point where they can still work.
mhm,
So like their demographics look like this, like young people down here, old people down here.
mhm. It's very extreme in China. I think it's kind of a worldwide phenomenon, but in China, I think it's an extreme example, or maybe even a canary in a coal mine type of thing.
That's an eighth of the world's population
Yeah.
in China. Like that's not a canary in the coal mine. That's that's the main shaft of the coal mine is going to fucking collapse.
Yeah.
That's
Sweet,
that's
sweet.
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's interesting, and there's some, you know, some counter information out there, right, saying that the world population isn't really 8 billion, and that math is just based on bad math, essentially, because nobody's done a
Hmm.
global census, and that it's actually way less, way less, and you start to see
Yeah.
it in some in like that idea. Like I don't know if it's true, right? I don't know if it's correlation or connection. That look, U.S. economics, the um, employment rate is unemployment rate is still at like 3.5%. But yet Amazon, Microsoft, all these big companies just shredded tens of thousands of jobs at a time. And the
Yeah.
unemployment rate is still around 3%.
Well, yeah. What's the current rate of inflation? The answer is it depends on how you measure it.
Mhm.
Right. So like
Yeah.
the rate of inflation that is produced in the consumer price index
Mhm.
says we're at what, like 7, something like
Mhm.
that. You look at shadow stats and they measure it by when did we change it? Like the mid 70s. Like
Mhm.
the the CPI
What they
shifted
measured. Yeah,
what
yeah.
they measured to provide a more favorable measurement of inflation.
Mhm.
So using the measure of inflation that we used to use to provide us, however you want to conceptualize, an accurate
Mhm.
view of things, just take whatever the CPI is, double it, maybe add a couple little extra tenths of a percent there, and that's what actual inflation is.
Mhm.
So yeah, I could see like our understanding of what the world population is could be vastly different than what it actually is. I'm doing my part, right? Anne and I are having 3 kids.
That's funny.
She wants
And
4.
actually, Elon would agree with you. That's why he has so many kids. Right. He has like 6 kids. Same reason. Right. I'm just saying, like he's doing his part. If you ask him, he's doing his part. He believes what he's
Yeah,
saying. I'm just saying.
I you remember how Neuralink
Mhm.
seemed like a not a okay, 4 or 5 years ago when people started talking about it, I was like, that seems kind of futuristic and cool. And now it seems creepy to me and weird and like something I am never going to entertain ever.